think that sometimes pagan deity work can be seen as like, oh, this is spell work, and it's not. Deity work is theurgy. Deity work is devotion. It's connecting to the divine. It's connecting to something that's other than yourself. Welcome back to the Diaries of a Witch podcast. My name is Angelica Creasy, and today we're going to be answering your burning questions about witchcraft, Hades, so many things, so many topics we're going to be covering. Thank you so much to all of my patrons who submitted these questions. We have a part of our Discord server called Ask Angelica, and so I took basically like all the questions that were coming in from that part of our Discord server, and we are answering them today in this podcast episode. If you would like to become a patron, there are so many perks. There's so much stuff going on in the Patreon group. We have 3 different tiers, so you can choose the level of content and the subscription level that you prefer. The Coven tier is the most common tier. It is the highest tier, and it's called the Coven tier because you get access to monthly live events with our community, which is really fun. So sometimes they're rituals, sometimes they're classes. You also get an exclusive live stream every single month where you can come and get a mini tarot reading from me during the live stream. Check out the show notes for all the information about becoming a patron. And again, thank you to my patrons who submitted these great questions. The first question is from Sugar Plum Fairy in our Patreon Discord. And this question is it okay to leave offerings to rot on Persephone and Hades' altar because they are underworld gods? And can Persephone and Hades and Demeter all be on one altar together? So for the first question about offerings to rot, I find that I personally have left offerings on chthonic deities' altars to rot before. I've also cleared offerings before they rot. It's kind of, I think, more of a personal preference on how you like to give your offerings. I never really leave them with the sole purpose of waiting until they rot. Sometimes I just leave them there for a while and they end up rotting. Sometimes they end up rotting really quickly and I feel like there's really nothing I can do about it. Sometimes, probably because of all the chthonic energy on the altar and in the altar, I will put an offering in there and I can just tell that it has been partaken in how quickly it rots or changes color or, whatever else happens to it. But I don't really specifically say, okay, let me wait until this rots. Sometimes I go to the altar and I feel like the deities are not finished with the offering yet. And so I will leave it there for a couple of days, either till I feel like they are done. Sometimes I ask them. You can, I do this psychically, but you can do this with divination tools if you really want to. But chances are, if it starts to rot or mold or discolors in some way, or just kind of changes its shape or color or size, you can probably presume that the deity has taken all that they need and can from that offering, and it's time for you to dispose of that offering. I do understand your question in terms of is it okay for, specifically the chthonic gods, or, because rot has to do with death, is that something that is permissible? And my answer to that is, I think it's totally permissible, and I also think that it might be permissible to more types of deities than you think. I think especially the chthonic gods, right? But, you might even find that other deities don't care or are not upset if you leave offerings to rot on their altar, or if offerings do end up rotting on their altar. This might be a personal practitioner to deity conversation, and I would really recommend having that with your deity. But I do, I'm kind of thinking, and I do know of friends and mentors and other practitioners who don't work with gods of the chthonic realm, but who have definitely left offerings to rot, or offerings ended up rotting on the altar, and it wasn't a big deal or wasn't a big to-do. However, kind of alternatively to that, I do know a lot of practitioners who really make sure that they keep their altars as clean as possible, and they try to keep the energy of the altar quite clean. So anytime there is anything rotting or anything going wrong in terms of like flowers dying or, an offering starting to turn, they will immediately discard it because they just want to keep a certain energy in the altar, or maybe they feel as though their deity will be upset in some capacity if they do leave those things to rot. So I understand it from both perspectives, and I really just feel like it's kind of like a deity by deity basis, but generally speaking, I do think the chthonic gods are probably more okay with it, and to some extent, it's probably something that's going to happen more often when you're working with the chthonic energy. Things are going to shrink and rot and start to mold quicker just because of that nature. And if that happens, I don't really think that they care personally. So I hope that answered your question. I kind of covered like a couple of different themes within that same question, but that's just kind of the way that I think about it. And the second question was, can Persephone and Hades and Demeter all be on the altar together? This is a really great question as well. And the way that I think about altar setups when it comes to the underworld deities versus like the Olympian deities, this is for the Greek pantheon in particular, but you could also potentially apply that to other pantheons where we have like gods that live in the underworld and then gods that live in another realm. I like to think about it like this. I like to put the chthonic gods closer to the ground. I literally have my Hades altar back here. He's like basically under my main working altar, which is back there. And so he is like under a table, and that symbolizes him being in the underworld. When Persephone is in the underworld with him, so during the fall and winter, I put her statuary down there with him, and they get to hang out together because symbolically she's in the underworld. When Persephone is in the upper world, when she is kind of on Earth or, in the other realms during the spring and summer, I put her back on this little altar. It's like a bookshelf. And so I put her right up here, and there's a window right here so she can be in the sun. And that kind of symbolizes her being in the upper world. So when I think about Hades, Persephone, and Demeter all being on one altar, Demeter is an Olympian deity. She's not really like a chthonic deity. And it's funny because that was one of the other questions from one of my other patrons is Demeter like considered a chthonic god? Technically, no. Like she is an agricultural goddess. She is a goddess of the earth, specifically like the upper realms. She is an Olympian deity, so she is technically of Olympus. So she's not a chthonic deity. And for that reason, I probably would not put her on a Hades altar because it would just feel strange to kind of put her into the underworld. However, I could see you doing an altar setup that was about like the three of them in their mythology working together to sort of symbolize like the Homeric hymn to Demeter, to symbolize the mythology that involves all three of them. So I could see you doing maybe like a spring or a fall celebration, celebrating the entire myth of Persephone and Demeter and Hades, where you have an altar set up that honors all of them and they're all on the same altar. I do know a ton of people, especially like Hellenic polytheists, who work basically with the entire pantheon, and they will do certain rituals and celebrate holidays of the gods of the whole pantheon. I know a lot of Hellenic polytheists who do keep Hades on an altar with Demeter and Persephone, and everything is great, right? I also know people who don't necessarily approach altars the same way that I do in terms of having the chthonic gods closer to the ground and having the gods of Olympus or the gods of Earth kind of set upwards. I like to do that. I really like to play around with like dynamic altar setups like that. I just think it's really cool and it resonates with me. And I work with mostly chthonic deities, so I kind of just like having all of the altars on the ground. It just makes sense to me, and it's been something that I have done for the last couple of years. So if you are not somebody that really resonates with that idea that the chthonic gods are kind of closer to the ground and the upper gods are going to be, elsewhere in the room, then you could totally put them on an altar together. There's kind of like evidence against it and also evidence for it, if that makes sense. And so I think maybe just asking the deities, all of them, how do you feel about being on the altar together, and see what their thoughts are. You could also just place them on the altar together and see what comes up, see what happens. You might feel like you have a hard time connecting with one of those deities, and the reason might be because they for some reason don't actually want to be on the altar together. This can sometimes happen, and it can really vary from practitioner to practitioner. Working with deities are kind of like perfume, in the sense that, when you spray perfume on your skin and like your pheromones are going to change the way that the perfume smells. It's the same thing with deities. Like, the way that you work with a deity is going to be vastly different than other people you know. You might have some similarities. There might be some universal experiences, like the notes of the perfume are going to be the same, but the way that it ends up smelling is different. This is the case with deity work. So that is why, I'm sort of saying, this is what I like to do, and I probably wouldn't put Demeter on the Hades altar, or, Hades on the Demeter altar. However, you might find that they love being on the altar together, and that might work super, super well for you in your personal practice. So I would encourage you to ask the deities. I would encourage you to play around with it. Just set it up and see what happens and see what you can feel. And honestly, these types of like hands-on deity work experiences are so useful for somebody that is maybe like newer to paganism, or even somebody that's been doing this for a long time. It's helpful to like do things that you're not sure are going to work, so that you can track to see what happens and say, wow, I put Hades and Demeter and Persephone on the altar and they hated it, or Hades really wasn't able to come through and I really wasn't able to channel him as well. Maybe it's because they were all together and he didn't really feel comfortable coming through. Whatever it is, right? It's important that you see what happens, record it, and then you can work with that information and, shift the way that you practice moving forward. The next question is from Jamie. And Jamie says, I have a question about my wards. I have railroad spike wards that I have in my house. I know they should be reanointed every few months, but what would be a good way to cleanse them? Smoke, leaving them in salt for a period of time? ? So this question is about how are we keeping up our wards? How are we cleansing them? How are we reanointing them? That sort of thing, right? I find that with wards, and it depends on exactly what it is and what type of ward you have. But for like a hanging ward, or in this case, you have like the railroad spikes, right? It is kind of like this physical object that has a warding enchantment that you've placed on it, right? You have to kind of think about the intention that you had for the ward when you set that enchantment, right? Do you have the intention that the ward is going to absorb negative energy? Do you have the intention that the ward is going to literally kind of shoot out like a protective auric field around your house that's going to actually prevent those energies from even coming into your house? Think about the way that you conceptualize the ward working, and that will change the way that you approach cleansing or reanointing the particular ward. So for example, one of my favorite wards is taking like 2 iron coffin nails and tying them together with red string. It's a great hanging ward. You can wear it on your person. You can put it in your wallet. You can carry it with you. You can put it in your car. You can do so many things with that particular ward. When I make that ward, I am imagining that it is sending out like this protective, almost like armor, either around my person, or if it's hanging up on my door, it's sort of casting that over my door and my threshold environment. So unless I wanted to like remake that ward and reconsecrate it, I probably wouldn't cleanse it, because technically the intention was not for it to absorb anything, right? I hope this is making sense. So when it comes to cleansing your wards, should I cleanse my wards? How should I cleanse them? I would really only cleanse the wards that specifically have the intention of them absorbing negative energy on your behalf, or them absorbing and taking in negative energy. So things like evil eyes or a crystal that you're using as a ward, those things could definitely use a regular cleansing. And depending on what the object is, you might want to cleanse it differently. One of my favorite ways to cleanse objects is to place them in the sun. The sun has this very combustive energy, and so if you place an object that you want to cleanse in the sun with the intention that the sun is going to like eat away at all of that negative energy that it's absorbed, that's going to be really effective. But whenever you cleanse your wards, I would also make sure that you re-anoint them and reconsecrate them, because you might be burning off or cleansing off some of the enchantments that you've already set. So I hope that helps, and I hope like thinking about the wards in those 2 classes as absorbing and repelling, I hope that helps you understand maybe how you can approach re-anointing them and cleansing them potentially. The next question is from Folklau in the Discord server. How many gods, saints, and deities are too many to worship at the same time? Is there ever such a thing as too much energy in the same home at once? I love this question. It's so fun. And, you know, this is really dependent on your personal deity work journey. Think about Hellenic polytheism. A lot of Hellenic polytheists will work with the literal entire pantheon, right? Mostly the Olympian deities, but there are like lesser festivals of other deities that are being practiced by Hellenic polytheists. I know Hellenic polytheists who have icons and statues of almost every single major god of the Greek pantheon in their home, and in different parts of the year, they will work with and worship those specific deities, right? At the times that it makes the most sense to do that. I also know people who work with one major deity and they really don't like to involve anybody more in their deity work practice. In my personal practice, I tend to be more towards the less deity spectrum because I personally feel like I can have a deeper relationship with deities if I'm working with less of them at the same time. I tend to want and actively seek out those really deep connections with deities, and sometimes I find that when there are too many deities that I feel like I need to split my time around with, it kind of makes me feel like anxious about not giving them all enough time, and it kind of makes my deity work practice less enjoyable for me. So you might be like me and feel that way. You might feel like, yeah, you know, I could probably work with 12, 15, 20 deities, but I'm going to choose like the 5 deities that I just have a really deep connection with right now, and I want to, you know, continue to investigate and learn from those relationships. But you might be somebody who really does like to have a ton of deity connections, and maybe you are the type of deity work practitioner where like you like to go to different deities for different petitions. I am not. I typically go to Hades for almost anything that I need. Partially because he's my patron god and I feel like he has a interest in me. And so even if something is not necessarily of his domain that I ask him to do or petition him for, I know that he cares enough about me and like my well-being that he will, you know, make it happen, that he will at least consider the petition and see if there's anything that he can do about it. And I do know a ton of people who have matron or patron deities who will kind of approach them slightly differently than the other gods that they work with. The way that I think about it is there are some gods that are in your life forever, like for your entire life, and they might have even been walking with you before you are in this current incarnation. There can be deities that serve a specific purpose in your life, and they are not meant to work with you long term or for your entire life. And then there's deities who are not going to come into your life for a very long time, but suddenly they come in, maybe due to a life change. So you might find that you only work with like 1 or 2 deities for 10 years, and then suddenly you have a major life shift and a bunch of new deities start to come in because they are like, hey, I can help you with this recent life change that you've been experiencing. And now you're finally ready to, you know, come down my path and learn my mysteries. So in that case, you might have an instance where you were just working with 1 or 2 deities, and now you have a much larger group of deities that are coming in and want to connect with you. So the question was, is there ever too many deities? And, you know, is there a set amount that we should aim to work for? I think that every single person has a amount or a threshold of deities that they feel like they can work with comfortably in a way that makes sense for them in their practice. Caroline asks, have you found that there's anything, offerings, ritual styles, etc., that Hades doesn't like, or anything that you would advise worshipers to avoid? I kind of had to think about this one for a little bit, and I'm sure this is one of those questions where I'm gonna like wake up in the middle of the night in like a cold sweat because I remembered something else that I wanted to add to this. So I will tell you what I think about this, but I do almost want to offer the extension of follow me over on Instagram because I feel like I'm going to post more about this in the future because it's a really fascinating question. And yeah, I want to think about it a little more and, you know, kind of have like a longer response to that, because I think it's a really fascinating question. And I think it's sometimes helpful when I am teaching about Hades to not just teach like what he likes, but also like this question, what doesn't he like? What should we avoid? I think it's a really fascinating way to conceptualize deity work with Hades. So one of the things that I feel like Hades does not really like, or something that I wouldn't approach Hades with, is I wouldn't approach the relationship from the beginning of the connection with the intention that you are going to like get something from him. I think that this can happen, especially when people hear about pagan deity work online, or maybe for the first time. And I don't know if anybody else has noticed this, but I've noticed like kind of an uptick recently in people thinking about pagan deity work as this real like transactional thing, or as like a thaumaturgical discipline of magic. Of course, we can petition deities and they can help us with things, right? But we should never approach deity work relationships thinking, oh, I'm just gonna give you this and then you're gonna give me this in return. And I find that Hades in particular really doesn't like that or appreciate that. So, sometimes I'll even hear people talking about Hades online and being like, yeah, he's really great for money. You should totally work with him for money. And my kind of caveat to that is like, yeah, he totally is. But you can't just like show up and be like, hey Hades, help me do this money spell. Or like, hey Hades, never talked to you ever before, but what do you think? Can you give me like 10K? Like, he's gonna be like, who are you and why are you talking to me? I recently did a reel where I told the story of how I petitioned Hades to help me afford my college textbooks, and then like immediately, like within 30 minutes of the spell that we did together, the spell manifested and I got the money for my textbooks. It was such a fascinating story. It's one of my favorite Hades deity work stories, and it involves a petition, right, where I got something in return. However, the thing that maybe isn't super clear just from that one video is that at the time I'd been working with Hades for about 3 to 4 years, and I had been offering to him on a regular basis. I had built a relationship with him. I, started to like really understand what his role was in my life. I knew he was my patron deity at that time. So I say that because I think that sometimes, I don't think that most people think this way, but I think that sometimes pagan deity work can be seen as like, oh, this is spell work. And it's not. Deity work is theurgy. Deity work is devotion. It's connecting to the divine. It's connecting to something that's other than yourself. And it's very different than just the practice of spells and witchcraft, right? So don't approach Hades like trying to get something from him. And I would really just approach Hades from the perspective of like, hey, you are really fascinating. I feel a connection to you. I want to get to know you. I want to feel your energy and just kind of get to know you and interact with you. And, from that kind of curiosity and just like friendliness, I think he responds super well to that. Another thing that Hades doesn't really like is he doesn't really like when you don't take his advice. And this can happen in a couple of different ways, right? I remember this was a long time ago. This was like years ago. So I don't even remember what platform it was on. This was like a viral video that was going around. Maybe it was on TikTok because of kind of, as I'm remembering it, it was definitely like a reel or a TikTok or something. But it was somebody that was like pretty new to the craft, pretty new to deity work, and they started working with Hades, and they felt like they like fucked up their relationship with Hades. And what they basically said was, hey, Hades will not speak to me. Like, he was talking to me, we were having a connection, and now I literally cannot get him to show up to ritual. I don't feel his energy with me anymore. What's going on, right? And, obviously I don't know this person and their situation, but I do know that sometimes when Hades feels like you are not, whether it's respecting him, whether it's listening to his advice, or whatever it is, right? Sometimes he will retreat. It doesn't mean he is like leaving your life for good or like, hey, I don't want to work with you anymore. He might say that, right? But usually what the retreating is he feels like there's something that you need to figure out for yourself on your own, and he just wants to leave you to it, and he wants to, kind of let you figure that out on your own. This has happened to me occasionally, and not for long periods of time, but this has happened to me where I feel like I can kind of feel his energy pulling back a little bit, and I always go, okay, what message has he been giving me that I've been ignoring or that I haven't been taking action on? Or is there something else where he maybe feels like it is better for me long term to figure out something on my own rather than involve him with something? So for an example of that, maybe I've asked Hades over and over and over again to help me with like getting into college or something, whatever it is, right? Getting into a school or getting a certain job. Let's say that I just keep asking him for it. I keep asking him for advice. I feel like nothing's really happening. I'm not getting any acceptance letters. I'm not getting the job, whatever's going on, right? Whatever example you want to use. What Hades might do is he might just retreat and go, hey, I'm just going to let you know that I'm working on this for you, but I don't want you to ask me about it anymore. I don't want you to keep coming to me with the same thing. And I'm just going to kind of be over here until this thing happens in your life. So it might be related to a lesson that he has to teach you, something that you're working on with him, something that you've asked him for or petitioned him for. This kind of goes in alignment with that previous idea of like Hades doesn't like it when you're like super demanding towards him. So if you've ever felt like this has happened to you, don't go, fuck, what did I do? I don't want you to like freak out about it and go, oh, I did something wrong. I need to like get on his good side again. He doesn't want that. He doesn't want you to come at him and be like, now I need to get on his good side. That's not why. He's not mad at you, That's not why he's retreating. He's retreating because he is this devotee of mine or this seeker of mine just needs to learn a lesson, and I'm just going to leave them on their own to learn that lesson while I go and do other things, right? So just ask yourself, what were the last messages that Hades has given me? What was the last thing that I talked to him about? What were some of the things that we were working on together? Have I been doing my shadow work and approaching life from this perspective of self-mastery? A lot of the times when we are not practicing that level of awareness or shadow work or self-mastery, Hades wants to just pull away slightly so that we can see that there are shadows of ours that we are ignoring and that we are unwilling to acknowledge. Hades is an amazing deity, and I think working with him can just shift so many things about your life, but he is not a deity that is going to humor you when you are in kind of a destructive mode, right? He is going to see that and he's going to be like, hey, I need you to shift something in the way that you're approaching this. I need you to start, working on that in therapy. I need you to journal about this. I need you to stop worrying so much about this petition that you've asked me for. I need you to trust me. I need you to trust yourself. And that's why I love working with him. And that's why I think he is such an incredible deity. And I've never worked with any deity like him. And I just can't say enough good things about him. And I really appreciate that energy coming from a deity, right? I would appreciate that coming from a teacher or even a friend. The last question is, do you have any tips on cartomancy or divination with playing cards? I just started learning, and that was from Sugar Plum Fairy. I've been reading playing cards for quite a while. I started reading playing cards maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, and it's something that I've done professionally. I used to offer like a playing card specific reading, and whenever I do Hades channeling readings, I do use playing cards for the most part with that. So technically I still do have a Hades reading, playing card reading that I do with Hades. And so my advice on learning how to read the playing cards is learn about all the different perspectives of playing card divination. There is so much history behind how playing card divination developed, and it kind of bleeds into the tarot and how we conceptualize the tarot. Playing cards were kind of the original card divination system, and that morphed into tarot, and then that morphed into Lenormand, and there's so many other systems that were based off of playing card divination. So in a way, playing card divination is kind of the root of all card divination methods. So learning about the history of playing card divination is something that I would really recommend learning about. And there's lots of different styles of playing card reading depending on what perspective you are interested in. If you are interested in like the more French perspective, you know, pick up like a Lenormand deck, which is based in French playing card reading, or maybe get a playing card reading deck, but familiarize yourself with the Lenormand correspondences and kind of use them in tandem. If you already read tarot, you can basically take what you already know about tarot and apply it to the playing card divination system, right? Take what you know about the minor arcana and the court cards and apply that information to the playing cards. So what I would recommend doing is just learning about a bunch of different types of correspondences for each of the playing cards, for each playing card, and I would literally write them on the deck of playing cards. That's the cool thing about playing cards, is they're so inexpensive. So literally buy a deck and have it be your reading deck. And when you read about or learn about a new correspondence of that card, write that on the actual playing card itself with a Sharpie. I also think that with playing card divination, it's really helpful to make sure that you're activating your intuition and your psychic abilities so that you really can allow your psychic abilities to guide you through the reading. This is true for any type of divination method, but especially for playing card divination, where you might be drawing from a bunch of different types of correspondences. Another way you can work with playing cards is you can use them as like a vessel for a deity or a spirit to come through. So I really like using playing card divination when I am talking to deities. So Hades in particular, I love using playing cards with him, and I have a playing card deck that is consecrated with Hades' energy. So when I'm drawing the playing cards, I am channeling from him, right? It's his messages. He is giving me all of these messages that are coming out. And so the correspondence list for his deck is much different than maybe for just a normal playing card deck that I will use for every reading, right? I have Hades specific correspondences, Hades specific quotes and messages that he's given me over time that I write on those cards. And whenever I read with them, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm reminded of this time that Hades gave me this advice through this card. And that's what's coming up for this client, or that's what's coming up in, you know, my current reading or something like that. So using them as vessels for not just your intuition, but also for spirits and deities can be super helpful. I am going to be holding a Coven tier Patreon class to learn how to do playing card divination. So if you want to talk about the specific cards in the playing card deck, you want to learn about the correspondences of them and my approaches to playing card divination, how I learned how to do playing card divination, and the correspondence list that I personally use to this day with my playing cards, that is all coming in my playing card divination class. This class is happening on Tuesday, November 26th at 7 p.m. Eastern. It's happening exclusively in the Coven tier of my Patreon. So joining the Coven tier of my Patreon will give you access to this live class. You'll also get access to the replay. So if you can't make it live, but you are in the Coven tier, you will be able to watch back this class. We couldn't get to all of the questions in this podcast episode, so I am recording an extended version of this. It's going up in the diary and the Coven tier of Patreon. It's time now to shout out all of my Coven and diary tier patrons. Thank you so much to Jamie, Cheryl, Emma, Alexis, Alessandra, Ashley, Luna, Taylor, Jordan, Chelsea, Quinn, Floor, Megan A, Natalie S, Megan M, Caitlin, Melissa, Natalie H, Jen, Carrie, Kat, Lauren, Kayla, Alethea, Lindsay, Tyla, Sarah, Quinn, April, Robert, Danya, Joanna, Megan S, Megan R, Callie, Nina, Mia, Irene, Chelb, and my newest member, Haley. Thank you again.